Hello, in this video we're going to be looking at this question regarding collusion and oligopoly. Now the question itself is very easy to get diverted away from this question, so it's really important that we look at exactly what it is being asked for. So please do take some time, read the question and think about what exactly you are answering. So coming back, we're looking really at the importance of why, the reasons for collusive behavior. So do be careful. This is not about the outcomes of collusive behavior in general, nor is it about the outcomes of oligopoly in general. You are evaluating the reasons for collusive behavior. So it's really, really important there. Are consumers and how they're impacted by this, is that relevant, for example? Perhaps less so. So if we're going to look at the definitions and key points, we'll certainly want to define collusion. We'll want to look at the idea of raising barriers to entry, possibly fixing prices, possibly limiting output in order to raise collective profit. From the very beginning, we want to be looking at oligopoly and interdependence and the base context behind this. This is a five truck manufacturer market. So clearly this is going to involve interdependence. And we want to list out some reasons why. I think going to these straight away will make this a lot easier. So we're going to avoid price wars, raising collective profit, and creating in some senses of certainty, investment, and economies of scale. Now, the first area to go to, think about diagrams. Do you think about it and think, what two diagrams or sets of diagrams could I use to make these points? So coming back, clearly this diagram here, the payoff matrix, will be very useful. Instead of firm A and firm B, I could use Scania and MAN, for example, or DAF, two truck manufacturers. And on the other side, we can use the cartel diagram that I've got there as well, using an output quota. So our first point, we're looking at usage of this collusive behavior to avoid price wars due to the problem of interdependence. So think about how can you create a logical chain of reasoning using that payoff matrix that we have here. Okay, so coming back, it's really important that you talk your way through all parts of the diagram, but specifically, first of all, that we're looking at the ideas of interdependence, that the actions of Scania, the outcomes of those actions are determined by the reactions of other firms and their prediction of what those reactions would be. So it is unclear, because we don't know how other firms will react if we don't collude, that therefore the outcomes could be quite worrying for firms. So we therefore have to predict their strategy, and we can then talk our way through this payoff matrix. We could look at the high price, and the highest joint profit. We've got 7.7 and 7.7 there. You can add them up as well to actually show what is that joint profit. Now, we could get into this idea of conflicting interests. There's a conflicting interest because we want the highest joint profit for the industry, but also there's an incentive for individual profit maximization by dropping your individual price. And therefore, you can achieve 10 billion profit as a result at the cost that the rival then only gets 1 billion. Therefore, the collective profit then falls down to, or the joint profit falls down to 11 billion, which is problematic for the industry. Now, knowing that, however, if there is perfect information, and if the first mover who'd first dropped their prices knew that the outcome for the other firm is to get 1 billion, and the outcome for then their reaction to further drop their price to the low box would be to gain 4 billion, because as you drop your price, you then pick that up, then they would be able to predict that dropping their price is likely then to result in the collective profits dropping all the way down to 10 billion as a result, and my individual profit dropping from 7.7 to 5 billion. So this is the worst collective outcome. It is likely because each of our firms have an incentive to do so. And therefore, we can come back to the question, evaluate the reasons for collusion. The reason for the collusion is that is not a good scenario for individual firms or for the collective industry as a whole, and we would like to avoid it. So let's think about how we might go about doing this in terms of evaluations. So let's think about the regulators. in what sense does the regulator, how do their actions influence this decision? Just give that some thought. You might want to research it a little bit before coming back to it. Okay, so if we're talking about an oligopoly industry, there is the role of something like, for example, the CMA, the Competition and Markets Authority. In this case, it was the European regulator. Because collusive behavior is illegal, we need to be very clear about that if you set agreements, that is an issue. In this context, the truck manufacturers were actually delaying new engine rollouts. So they had emissions laws which required them to roll out new products. They delayed that so that they would then not have to then engage in research and development, which would have been costly. So they were making agreements to delay new products. And of course, that's bad for consumers. So we know that these actions are illegal and they may face fines. And a rational firm, if we think about the idea of rationality, you think about your costs and your benefits. The benefits of collusion are clear, we just laid them out, but the costs of collusion depend on the perceived risk and size of the fine. So they're asking those questions. Am I going to get caught? And if I do get caught, what's the outcome? Now, you might look at, previous judgments. What other judgments have been made? And therefore, I could base on that. I could then think about, what is likely to happen to me? Now, you may challenge the idea that firms are rational. Perhaps they're irrational. Perhaps they prioritize their short-term interests at the expense of long-term outcomes for them. And in this case, perhaps there was a bit of both. A weak regulator, clearly because they were able to do this for 14 years without being taken to court. And those antitrust laws, those laws which forbid collusive behavior, are often reactive. They often look at the situation and react. And therefore, it may well be in the short run that you can get away with it, but clearly they may have looked back on these sets of actions and regretted it as a result, having been fined a significant amount of money. I think it's in the question, isn't it? 880 million euros. So clearly it may well not have been a rational thing to do, given that the outcomes probably didn't benefit them as much as the 880 million of fine. Lovely. Right, let's take a look at point number 2, the control of the industry output to raise collective profit. And we can get into this idea of reducing uncertainty, allowing innovation and investment, specifically looking at that diagram there. So think about how could you use that diagram to create a logical chain of reasoning and demonstrate your understanding of how cartels work by limiting output and raising prices. Pause the video and come back. So, this diagram is slightly different to what we have seen before, and you will need to be able to explain your way through it. The crucial thing is that the cartel sets joint industry output at MC equals MR. They profit maximize and set a profit maximizing quantity or cartel output at a higher price, cartel price. Now, as a result of that, individual cartel members must then agree to produce a limited amount of their goods, and therefore they have this quota output. In this case, actually, this output was the output of new innovative practices, innovative engines, for example, and they reduced the output of those that delayed the onset of them, and then they allowed them to increase and have higher prices for lower quality goods. Now, individual cartel members make a profit of cartel price minus AC. So you can see on here, this area here, you would want to refer to that area and say that that is a higher level of profit. And what does that then allow them to do? Well, that allows them, because they have certainty, they know that they're going to be able to make this profit into the future. That means that they have confidence. Their profit is also higher, and therefore they can use this, their certainty about their market share, their dominance through their negotiated agreements, that they are then able to increase investment, possibly, or simply divert more money back to their shareholders. Now, in this case, in the truck industry, there's very significant economies of scale, and so this may allow for greater barriers to entry because you're able to gain market share, barriers to entry would rise as well, and that is a significant benefit. And actually, innovation didn't happen, particularly as much as they would have expected. They raised barriers to entry through economies of scale. And that is really where we can focus on our discussion here on contestability. So think about how you might use contestability to challenge some of these ideas within this industry. So, contestability refers really to the potential competition within the industry, and it refers back to the idea of what we just raised there about barriers to entry. Now, if you don't have barriers to entry, or particularly high barriers to entry, or if your barriers to entry are short-term and can be overcome through technology, then it's likely that firms would be worried about setting cartel-style agreements. Those high supernormal profits act as an incentive for potential firms to enter the market, and therefore the cartel is likely to break down if it is actually contestable. As you can see here, the potential for entrance. Also, the significant technical economies of scale, though you could put it the other way around, that collusion was actually easier to sustain. There are very, very difficult barriers to overcome for any potential entrant, and therefore it's very, very difficult. And therefore this collusion was able to prevent that innovation from happening, and there was delays to new emissions technologies. Now, interestingly, we could take this further. We could also look at the idea that, well, to what extent do firms... I just lost my train of thought here. What was I going to say? Let's not worry about that. I think we probably got enough for that paragraph anyway. But oh yes, I was going to say also the idea of the cartel leader as well. To what extent are the smaller firms worried about the reactions of the cartel leader? Also, in this particular case as well, MAN, the truck manufacturer, was the whistleblower. They reported everyone else. Now, if they dare report everyone else to the authorities, well, what does it take for that to happen? And clearly they may well have felt that they didn't benefit enough from this cartel. You may also look at the idea of exceeding your cartel output as well. The negotiations are difficult, and so you could refer to some of the conditions which means that cartels work or break up respectively. Right, now have a think about what your judgment would be on this. Ultimately, what does this whole essay hinge on? What factors does this depend on? So, it ultimately really does depend on the time period considered. You may want to focus back on rationality, the goals of firms, and whether firms are behaving rationally. It may well be that you take a look at the idea of divorce of ownership from control. If managers are in charge of a firm and dictating decision making, it may well be that they're taking riskier decisions. Knowing that they may not be in charge in the future, they may want to just expand the size of their firms, and they ultimately do not have to pay the fine when it comes in. Now, there may be issues of, well, prison sentences and things like that if they are found out, but it could be an interesting thing to look into that, what the reasons for that short-term thinking. And certainly MAN and the other, Scania and the other firms were at risk of that. Now, you could also look at the degree to which there is reputational damage involved. And the degree to which there is asymmetric information. It may well be that these, rather than irrationality or the goals of the firms, it may well be that they simply did not know the outcomes of the fine, or they had incorrect information about the likelihood that they were going to get investigated. Ultimately, whether they do it or not really does depend on the barriers to entry and contestability. Without those things, it is just not possible to maintain a cartel or this type of collusive behavior. So if that changes over time, which is likely to do so because of technological change, therefore this becomes less likely. So pulling out those themes about irrationality, about the divorce of ownership for control, and perhaps the goals of the firms and the wider context of the market, particularly also the way in which they had a very strong trusting relationship because the 5 members of this market hadn't changed over time. That trust was really, really important for having this continue into the future. I hope that helps you to better structure this essay. It's not an easy one, and it's very, very easy to go off topic. So do take a further look at how you could further structure that.